container sidebar / inline size. I thought it was like more complicated. It's not. It's actually like pretty simple. Today we're talking about container queries.
Ooh, what are container queries? First question.
What are container queries?
Yeah, actually, this is a little bit out of my comfort zone, right? As a more back-end focused JavaScript developer. So all of the CSS stuff is a little bit foreign for me now. But this is actually something that I know everyone who's doing front-end development has been so excited about, because this was only this was always the part that was missing from CSS, right? So like you couldn't style something based on the width of the parent container or of some other container, like some of the ancestors. You always had to go, like even media queries, they go on viewport width and not like on container width. And now there is a spec. This has been implemented in many browsers. Actually, looking at the statistics, the global support, like it's not so good on Can I Use? It's like 76%. This is actually a lot. But what is missing is basically Firefox, right? Other than Firefox, all of the modern browsers have implemented container queries, and Firefox is going to get it in version 110.
10.
So the next major version. And then you have like some older devices, of course, that don't support it yet, right?
Yeah.
But what's the big deal about?
Yeah, just recently, I remember like we talked about container queries not being there yet, but and then things move forward quickly, kind of, and we are almost there. That's also why I thought we should talk about this again, because when do you roll out new features? When do you start using new technologies? Typically, when you have a quite good adoption rate about with modern browsers, right? And we don't need to take care too much about the old ones. Maybe use some polyfills there or something like that. But I think container queries soon are going to be the future or the reality. The future is now. Okay.
And you know what's also nice? Like there is actually a polyfill. And there has been a polyfill for quite some time. And if you do conditional like JavaScript loading, you could actually already use it and provide a polyfill. I see here that it's like 9 kilobytes compressed in size. The polyfill is in maintenance mode, but this like doesn't really...
Oh, I know which one you're looking at,
from Chrome Labs, right? So, but that it's in maintenance mode isn't so bad, right? Because like this polyfill should become obsolete in the near future. So, but for older browsers, you can still provide that. And then you probably have to like, there are a couple of things probably that you cannot use then.
Looks very interesting. I think I would like to dive in today also about when is the right moment and what might be caveats with using a polyfill, and also find out for ourselves when should we jump on it, because we're still planning the release of Flint version 2.0, and I think a year ago we said no, we won't implement container queries yet with a polyfill. It's too early. But I also don't want to be too late to the party, kind of. So maybe let's figure that out together. So today we're also going to discuss this a little bit, be a bit open. By the way, for those who are listening or those who are viewing this on YouTube, would highly appreciate if you leave a comment about any ideas you would like us to talk about more, or if you're using container queries already on your project. Please also make sure to like and subscribe. And I want to say today a big thank you also to wppodcast.com. This is a website where like all kinds of WordPress podcasts are listed, and Tova was so nice to list us there as well. And check out some other podcasts about WordPress over there. So back to container queries. How does it work, Dominic?
How does it work? Like what in detail, or what's the special thing?
Maybe the special thing
Just
or the specification, like what you can do with that. Probably most people listening to this know the concept, but maybe we can get more into detail. How do you define a container query?
yeah. So basically, you first have to make a container, or yeah, make an element a container, right? And for that, you need the attribute like container type, where you have, I think, either inline size or size, right? And then you can give it an optional name.
Yeah.
And then you can define a container query, just like you do define media queries with, instead of add media, you do add container. And then you just say, like, for example, the container name, and then the min width, or like a modern media query width is greater equal, or something like that. And then inside the following block, you specify the CSS rules that should be applied. Right?
Yeah, right.
And that's it.
I think that's it. It's yeah. I thought it was like more complicated, but it's not. It's actually like pretty simple. Yeah. And for example, in Flint, we do have a helper class called container already to have a wrapping container on components. We could just basically say container class and then define this as a container, maybe give it a name of component container, inline size. And then we would be ready to use container queries. I also personally, I like the shorthand. I'm not always a shorthand guy, but I like this shorthand. Let's just saying container, colon, and then sidebar / inline size. I think this is pretty straightforward to define this as a container.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the magic only happens, right? From that point on, you can do so much cool stuff. I think probably you can also write a lot of the traditional media query stuff and rewrite that into container queries where you don't have many benefits. But what I think what container queries really are about is the context-based behavior, right? Being able to write a component or a part, even the smaller module of a component in a way that it adapts to the context where it's used. And this can be specifically hard, like when you have something which should work with, usually different layout widths, like a component that should work in a sidebar, but also on full width. And we have that sometimes even with partials, like a video player that you develop, and then you want that video player to work and behave in different types of components. This was very tedious and error prone, like in the past. And I think this could be a big improvement and make things actually more simple. How is it more simple, more maintainable? Probably not simple. Probably what you're building is more complex in a way of that you that you start using it in a more complex way and more abstract way and more contexts.
Yeah. You might also be able to reuse stuff more, right? Than before. Before you have maybe like different components for different use cases, or like maybe even different CSS for different classes that you now just have for different, where you manually had to go in and say what kind of variant from a component you wanted, right? And now you can just do that via container query. I'm actually thinking like, are media query, like we probably on a component level, we won't even need media queries anymore. Is that true? And
yes,
and rather go with the container queries.
Because here's the thing: if you the container query, if you define a container query on an element, and it doesn't have a parent element that is defined as a component, as a container, then it will fall back to the viewport.
Yeah,
like the fallback kind of as a media query is built in to it already.
Yeah.
So it sounds like
Just
you
when
only
you
need media
want to
queries
break
anymore.
out, but yeah, when you want to break out and have like this full bleed components, right, that go from all the way left to all the way right, and you still want the container to be that, so you could either use like a named container for the body or use a media query.
Oh,
Then I
sure.
guess,
Like,
right?
yeah, absolutely. Like, I think that there will still be use cases
Mm,
for media queries where you actually want that behavior. I think what I might be a little scared about is also having too many variations. Like, because
mm,
kind of the nice thing about media queries still is you have consistent breakpoints. Sometimes you want to break out of those breakpoints, but at the same time, it can be nice to understand the behavior of your website or your application and yeah, to know when something will likely happen. If you start adding container queries with all kinds of context-based values and then also based on the character width of items and the height and I don't know, then yeah, it might feel like when you have a website and you shrink it down as a developer, that it feels like you have dozens of query
mm.
points and
Yeah, but I think like it doesn't have to be like that, right? Because you could just like like convert a media query where you have like the media query. You now just say, as you said, we make our content, our container, our main container on a page, which has like a content width usually, right?
Mhm.
So we basically instead of specifying these breakpoints based on the width of the viewport, we just specify this now by the width of the content
Mhm.
area or content container. And this is like,
Sure.
and then like everything should just look the same but use different things, and it will have like so many benefits, right? Like also think about how like we are still experimenting with Gutenberg and like are not using that for all of our client projects, just for some, and for our own website we used it, and there we always had issues rendering. Like we are using ACF blocks, which
Mhm.
render our components, our Flint components, into a preview in the block editor, and we had issues because we have the media queries based on the viewport width, but the page width of the preview is not the viewport width in that case, right?
Yeah, we talked about
So
this in the
yes,
Gutenberg episode. However, I think after that episode, I tried out a Gutenberg, a version of Gutenberg, and I was kind of baffled because they had an iframe for for the preview. I was like,
when
why?
you go to preview,
Yeah,
but not when you
I
just
think I
view.
was. I think I'm rather sure. Like it also was like when was in like in the edit mode. I was like, why is there an iframe? Like, did they change it? Why don't we have an iframe? I don't know, but
Okay,
this just adds to me to the
okay.
discussion. It's like, why is this different?
Mm,
And then I thought, okay, maybe it's just ACF blocks, but that shouldn't be the case either. I'm confused about that still, but
mm,
you've got to look into that as well. Like, why do they sometimes have an iframe? Why sometimes not? But either way, absolutely. Like even with that, like yeah, you might have your website in different contexts. Maybe the Gutenberg editor preview with ACF block. Might it be in a different sidebar in an iframe or I don't know whatsoever. I think this is super cool. Yeah.
mm,
And what's also nice is the new units that are
mm,
coming with the container queries.
yes.
You have instead of regular width or viewport width, right? You have VW, for example, as viewport width, and then we're getting some new units for the container query. CQW, container query width,
Mm,
CQH, container query height, and CQI, container query inline size, and CQB for container query container block size, which is dependent on if you define it as an inline size or a size container.
yeah.
Yeah.
CQ min
And
and CQ max,
CQ
like
min,
this.
CQ max,
Yeah.
right? And I think I saw a video about that yesterday, and yeah, that person said probably only use CQI because it's like when you use only the inline size, then if the viewport changes based on the orientation, right, that could happen, then you can always ensure that the context changes also if you want to actually take the width. Because it's context sensitive, just like also this thing about
I think like
right and so
in any case in CSS, like from what my experience is, when you start to be dependent on a height, on a viewport height or something like that, things get strange. So it's a lot more complicated than using the width, I think. Not as straightforward.
Right. But that was not just about the height, but about CQW versus CQI. CQW, the container query width, versus container query inline size, where container query, when you are on a regular desktop landscape, then CQ or even any device, basically CQW and CQI should usually be the same thing, unless the orientation changes, the reading orientation or the, like
if you don't have a left to right website.
Left to right or up or down. But this can also be dangerous.
But this is like the whole discussion about logical properties, right? So if you should use that or not, and of course, like going forward and making things more compatible and more accessible and so on, this might be a good idea. But we are still like in a transition phase, right? So I don't think it would make sense if you used width and margin left and right, and then use CQI.
You got to be consistent then, right? If you start mixing those things, then you will end up also with whatever. You don't know what you'll end up with, maybe. When should you name a container? When should you not name a container? I have
no idea.
Okay, good. So we're on the same page. So we gotta try it out and figure it out.
I think for nesting, this of course can make sense, right? If you let's say you have a body container or something like that, right? And then you have a content container and a sidebar container, and then you can just say like inside the sidebar, you could do something if the container is if the content container has a specific width, then do something to an element in the sidebar. But
I think nesting, I think the question also more is about not what does it do, but like what's the best practice? Like which are the use cases where nesting container queries is a good idea? Because when I think about it right now, nesting container queries sounds like dangerous to me. And I would probably prefer to have like to name my containers, or at least like the default ones, like the component container, to know, okay, this is always kind of the same type of container at the same position, and I know what to expect. However, if you go deeper inside of a component, you might have additional container queries. Do they actually do they inherit to some extent? Like the scope, the naming? Like, is there any scoping to that? No, probably not, right? Like if I define in anywhere in CSS, well, it's always on the global level, right? It's only in a different file for us when we write a component. But in the end, the container query itself, it cannot be inside of an element, nested to an element, right? But it's probably always going to be on the global scope. And then I'm going to apply it.
You cannot do nesting in CSS.
Oh, right.
We are not in SAS or SCSS. So no, there's nothing like nesting.
But I thought there was the new CSS syntax coming.
It's a proposal, and that's not yet implemented. So
oh, right.
Yeah.
good to know then. No, probably that was my thing. Just like, well, when I put it in a component and I start nesting things, no, sure, media query, like you can't also nest a media query. It's always top level.
Mm. Yeah, it's
But
just when you use a preprocessor, you can do something like that, right? But it will always be converted.
right, but then we're gonna write those media queries are going to be, we're probably gonna write them nested, right, with SCSS.
Yeah, we write everything nested, kind of. But
And then it just like elevates that up one level, so we don't have to always specifically write the media query, then the component name, and so on.
yeah, it just flips it around, right?
Yeah.
So, but still, it's interesting, and this like so when you don't, because in general, I would say just if you don't name your containers, things will be simpler, right? Because you cannot do like it's not only nesting, and that's, I think this is now a problem with media queries where this can occur if you use like weird stuff, right? So because if you specify a container query on a container that is specified after where you specify the container query,
But
then this doesn't work.
I think this is what's somehow on my mind with nesting as well, because what if you define a container on that is within a container already?
Yeah,
well,
we'll just
but
take
of course, then that's not the same size as the parent container, most likely, and it will just like then the
and that's the weird thing also.
Is nested.
Yeah, but what I also don't understand on how it's actually behaves. And sorry, people, for not knowing this by heart, but it's a new feature that we are not using yet in our daily business. But if you don't specify a container name in a container query, right?
Yeah.
Then this applies to any or all containers, right?
Everything that's defined as a container, yeah.
Yes. So every CSS rule inside of this will be applied if any of the containers match this query, right?
Yeah.
So this is what's kind of weird, right? And I don't know exactly how this will.
No, absolutely, and this is what confuses me about this as well, because this is like what feels to me like nesting. Because if you say like a container query, just container query, and then say p p tag, then and color red on min width 200 pixels, then that means every p tag that is within a container, which is defined as a container that grows larger than 200 pixels, becomes the color red. But this doesn't mean that also the p tag is like 200 pixels. But it could also, maybe the container has a max width, you know? This could lead to some weird results. But maybe in praxis it's not that weird. Maybe it's
exactly. So the problem that we have, right? So we have a p tag that is inside of a container that is also inside of a container.
Yeah.
Now, if our first container, like the outer container, is 600 pixels wide, and the inner container is 400 pixels wide, right? And then you have the p tag. So the p tag actually is in both containers.
Yeah.
Of course. The question now is just, will a media query, the container query, sorry, that says is a greater than 500 pixel, will the rule that is in there then be applied to the p tag? Probably not, right? Because it will only look at the parent container. So
will
it's
it only look at the direct parent container?
We could try it out.
And what if you don't specify inline size, where like the container size depends on the content inside? What if you use like the block version of that? Couldn't then also a parent container be smaller than its child container because you specifically set the width, like with the position absolute element that has larger elements contained inside?
Yeah, I mean, also with grid, right? a child element can be wider, even like it can have a bigger width than its parent element.
See, we gotta try this out more and make our experiences. But yeah, I think this can lead to some interesting results. You can probably do some tricky things with that, but also I think just by default trying to apply a container to everything is not going to be a solution, but also thinking this through on what you need and what really makes sense. Didn't I write a draft at some point already to propose container queries in Flint? I feel like something's coming to my mind where I rewrote some components already. No, I think this was something else. Was something about scope, about other scopes. But should we use container queries now? That's a question I still feel we need to answer. Typically, I would say, or I'm a big fan of progressive enhancement, and that's kind of the biggest problem I have with container queries and support, because there is no progressive enhancement, but it's likely going to be very radical. Like if you, let's say, you don't have a polyfill, then your website might look very broken. Let's say,
but you can use the supports query, right?
And write a fallback.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. But what if you rely on that? Like then you would end up with quite a broken website. And this polyfill, what they're writing there, they're suggesting that you add a solution where you hide the whole content below the fold and have a loading state visible. And then they, of course, say, well, but be careful because this probably slows down the page load or the LCP and so on.
Yeah, of course, because this is JavaScript based, right? So
right, then it's JavaScript, and then you rely on JavaScript for the rendering of your page. I don't like that idea too much. And then at the same time, who takes or what do we need to worry about when it comes to LCP? Well,
nothing.
Well, we got to think about the biggest browser, and that's Chrome, and about page speed scores, and that's Chrome, and that's like, no. Well,
actually, that's not true, right? That's not true, because the Web Vitals we know is field data. So
okay,
that means.
But from whom?
Yeah,
mostly Chrome.
Yes.
If not exclusively. I don't know. So, yeah, progressive enhancement, polyfill. What do you think?
Just from a end user point of view, I would say we do the fallback. Like have a container query, and then because we just said before, okay, it might be that we can just do one-to-one mappings from media queries to container queries. So we would have a container query and then just specify if not supports container queries or whatever, however you do that, then do a media query.
But we can only do that for the boring cases, I think. Yes. That's the thing. And then we don't need container queries because it's like, we can do that with media queries already. But we're talking about the cool stuff that you can do with container queries that are not that easy to replace, or you need to write maybe some extra specific fallback just for that. Wouldn't that be a bit too much effort?
Yeah, that's a bit too much effort, but you get comfortable with container queries now, right? So that means you have a better upgrade path, because it's like always then new stuff comes along as well, and then you decide, okay, are we then going to use the has selector as well, and right, and stuff like that. So
I think we are. I think Timo showed me something. I think we're about to do that. And by the way, the container query polyfill is dependent on the where selector. And they say if your browser doesn't support that, then you need to also write it a little differently than where has been around for a longer time, but still, yeah, it's not everyone. It's not like the polyfill instantly gets you to 99%, but it gets you a bit closer. But you will have people seeing maybe an entirely broken website. I don't want that. That's what I'm scared about. But it depends also on the type of user, right? If you're developing a website with a very high latest technology browser setup and so on, then maybe I would feel more comfortable with that. Let's say also our own apps, like the Planning Poker app, right, that we developed. Yeah, it'd be fine. Like it's an app that is made for developers.
Yeah.
And if that entirely didn't work for people not having latest browser, I would be fine with that. It's also free. It's not like so. I think it depends on the use case, but it's quite a big change to the whole architecture and introducing something new. So when would be a good point in time to move to that? Maybe it would be much more safe, like a year from now. But is that too late then already?
Too late for what?
No, not like too late. It's never like too late, but it's like, are we slowing things down or ourselves down with that? Should we there be a bit more progressive and just go ahead with that? Yeah, it feels a bit like back in the days with the IE stuff, where you had progressive enhancement, or you used new browser features, and then you had a fallback for older IE versions, and you just accepted that it was a good enough support, but things didn't look perfect. We could also go that route and say, we're just going to repeat history and treat it like IE 8, IE 7, and say, we're going to use the polyfill. It's going to look pretty good. It's going to be great on the latest browsers. It's going to be pretty good, almost like on the previous versions. And then everyone else just has to live with a compromise.
Yeah. I mean, this is kind of, well, it depends on how you formulate it. Like the way that you formulated it now, it's like, it's, what do you call it? Like degradation, like selective degradation or something like that. So you make the best experience for the latest browsers, and then you see, okay, yeah, maybe things don't look exactly the same. But you could also say, okay, we develop a baseline and then just progressively enhance that with like later stuff. And the question is just, how free are we with choices for the layout or design then, right? Because this is also like client specific, I would say.
But one more point again, or for going that route would also be like looking at the mobile focus, right? Because when we're developing things mobile first, usually, probably in the most cases, no queries would be applied on mobile anyways. But you code the mobile layout and then you progressively enhance from mobile to desktop. And if you expect that the larger user base would be on mobile and have that support, well, that's okay.
Yeah. And honestly, like if an old browser just looks like the mobile version, totally fine.
Yeah.
Like not, of course, not 100%, but yeah, I think that's fine.
So, dear Flint core team, if you listen to this, we're coming at you with some ideas and challenge us about it. Interesting. Great. Anything else about container queries?
Do we want to find out what, like, no, we will add this later maybe.
Find what out?
Like find out how the nested stuff is actually behaving, right?
Yeah, probably you got to try it out.
Yeah.
and then report back.
Yes.
Good. So probably we got a couple of things wrong here, or don't have the best picture of things. So go comment in the comments. Let us know what we got wrong, what we should read, and how we get to understand the best practices of container queries more quickly. Thanks.
Yeah. Good.